Okay.
He surprised the hell out of me the other night. We were all set to take off, and
All right, it's June 4th and 2003. We're in Merchantville, New Jersey, with Dick Smith, and Dick's going to tell us about his experiences and his life throughout and including the Korean War. Dick, where and when were you born?
well, I was born in 1923 right here in Merchantville, New Jersey, and grew up here and went through school. For a short period of time, the family moved up to Lewistown, Pennsylvania for about 5 years. But then I came back, and I took my last two high school years here in Merchantville High School. And then from Merchantville High School, let's see now, it was during my junior year that Pearl Harbor occurred. And I can remember that as if it happened yesterday. We were playing touch football out over here in Walnut Avenue, and one of my friends came out on the porch and said, hey guys, guess what? The Japanese attacked our fleet in Pearl Harbor. And we looked at him and said, drop dead. We couldn't believe it. But I'll tell you, it dawned on us by the time we got into school the next day, and that's all you could talk about. And I graduated, I finished out my senior year, but half the friends that I had dropped out of school to join up in the service. That was the thing to do. And so the handwriting was on the wall. We all expected we were going to serve in some capacity. It was just, you can't imagine the impact that event had. Not just the attack on Pearl Harbor, but some of the news that followed after the attack on Pearl Harbor. That was one thing. Well, Pearl Harbor, that's halfway across the Pacific. But then when we picked up a newspaper about 3 days later and saw a picture of one of these Japanese midget subs that had washed right up on the shores of California, and then the article said that the Japanese were amassing an army to attack through Alaska on the Aleutian Islands, that is when we really took alarm. And I can't tell you how the feeling that we had at that time about what we were going to do about it, because there's no doubt about it, we were not prepared for the war. And boy, that stimulated a lot of enlistments. And so I figured, well, I planned to go to college. I'd already signed, Uncle Bill's the one that put the money up, like your dad, to get started in Lafayette. I knew that I wasn't going to last because I'd already signed in the Marine Corps. I signed up over here in the Widener building in Philadelphia. And I'll never forget, the Captain Morgan was the one who signed me up. Boy, this guy was an old Marine from way back. And if he didn't look like he'd been through a meat grinder, I looked at his face and it just looked, he said, how do you like that? He said, that's what shrapnel does to you. And then the second thing he said, do you understand what you're getting into? Yeah, I think so. And he said, well, the Marine Corps is not the safest. And I said, yeah, but I feel that it's a kind of a unit that we need, and I want to be a part of it. So I signed up, and I started at school up in Lafayette, knowing full well I was going to get my orders. I mean, we were just kind of marking time up there. I didn't finish that first year. I had my orders before that year was up in Lafayette. And that's when they shipped me out down to Parris Island, boot camp. And on the way down, we went through Philadelphia, and Oni was my girlfriend, who was to be my wife, was working in Rittenhouse Square. And I phoned ahead because I heard that our train was going to stop at the 33 station. And then there was going to be a holdover down at Washington. So I decided to jump the train in Philadelphia to be with her one last time, and then catch a bus to get down to Washington to pick up the train again. And that's what I did. I walked into Arthur H. Thomas. That's where she worked, over in Rittenhouse Square, and she almost fell through the floor when she saw me. And her boss, she said, "Can I have the rest of the day?" He couldn't answer. She just walked out, and we went over and spent the rest of the day at the Philadelphia Zoo. And so I caught this bus, and I got down in time to catch the train again in Paris Island. And from Paris Island, we went to Quantico for advanced, or not Quantico, to Camp Lejeune for advanced training. And I was an officer, they put me in the officer candidate class there. And then when they had room at Quantico, then they sent our group into Quantico. So that's where I had my officer training at Quantico. And, we were following the war, and of course we were particularly following our classmates. The fellows who were ahead of me were the ones that made Iwo Jima, for instance. And another group made Tarawa. And we kidded about it because, they're saving us for the end of the war. We're the ones that are going to spearhead the invasion of Japan. And, they were absolutely right. Because the orders I got, they shipped me out to Camp Pendleton, and I told Oni, let's wait until after the war. I got out there, and they gave us some extra time, leave, before they shipped us out. So I got on the phone and said, come on out, let's get married. And she came out, we got married on the 4th of July in San Clemente, dear old San Clemente, California.
44?
1945.
45.
And this is now July and August. And the war, we dropped the bomb in August, and the Japanese surrendered. But in the meantime, we were making plans to invade Japan. And there were 2 divisions. There were Marine divisions that were going to spearhead the invasion of Japan. One was the 5th Marine Division. The other one was it would become the 6th Marine Division. And they were putting that together on the island of Guam. And I understand the 5th had already rendezvoused. We're in the area for organizing for the invasion. And we were organizing this new division on Guam. When the war ended, the Japanese surrendered. But they sent us anyway, this time, to disarm the Japanese, as I told you. And we were stationed in Yokosuka, the largest Jap naval base in the country. And that was an experience, because we got a real good look at how well dug in those people were and how ready they were for this invasion. And it would have been a tough one. I mean, there were things they had, for instance, they had a hospital built right into the side of a mountain. They had a railroad completely underground connecting Tokyo with Yokohama, almost 30 miles. And when we got there, no women or children, just men, and they were all in uniforms. And they had hid the women, had the women in the country, so they were ready for the invasion at that time. So that's what we did. We disarmed the Japanese, but then we heard that we were going to be sent to China, to a place called Tsingtao up in the Shantung Peninsula. And we knew that the Tsingtao, China, was the deep water port for our 7th Fleet, which still, I think, patrols that area, the Formosan Straits and so forth. And they didn't tell us too much until after we left Japan. And then we were told that we were going to round up refugees who were fleeing Russia and China, white Russians that had escaped the revolution and were living in fear of being sent back to Russia. And the other thing, of course, which we didn't realize till much later, was that we were backing up the nationalist government, because the communists had infiltrated into China, and they had started to attack the Nationalist army. And to make a long story short, by the time we got over there, most of the outlying country outside of the cities were under the control of these communist guerrillas. And the cities, of course, were held by the nationalist government. But Chiang Kai-shek was having his problems. I think he himself was honest, but he had a lot of corrupt people under him. And they were very unpopular. And he was losing his hold on the country. Nevertheless, we sent George Marshall over and Stilwell and so forth to try to back him up and advise him and so on. And it was just too much. They had lost their credibility and everything else. So it was just a matter of time. So the only thing that we could do was to help them occupy the cities. Now, a lot of people back in this country don't realize what we were doing. They kept telling the people back home we were over there to repatriate the Japanese army. There wasn't any Japanese army. We were over there to occupy the key cities, Tientsin, Shanghai, Tsingtao, and so forth, as long as we possibly could. And also to help get the refugees. There were all kinds of refugees that were streaming out of the country. A lot of people a lot of kids who had lost their parents through Jap atrocities and so forth, running around naked and homeless. And it wasn't the nicest situation to be in. But we realized what we were doing and while we were there. And so the only reason why the communists did not just march right in, and they could have done it because they had a curfew every night. We had to enforce a curfew because there was infiltration, communist infiltration, and they were either knocking off nationalist soldiers or stealing or kidnapping people, that type of thing. So we really took over the security of those cities. And as long as we were there, the communists didn't make any serious move. There was only one time I can remember when it was General Selden, I think it was, who was our CO. And we were ordered out during the night to occupy a perimeter, defensive perimeter he set up around the city. That we felt that there was a serious intent on the part of the communists to try to take the city by force. And before they came in, they sent a note into the general telling him what they intended to do, that we were coming in, we're not looking for a fight with the United States, we're just coming in to take over the city because the nationalists no longer have control. What are you going to do? Well, his answer was, he ordered us out and set up the perimeter. And they never tried it. So it was interesting. We took, on our particular ship, when we left China, we took some like 400 white Russian refugees back with us. And we took during this period of time, an awful lot of refugees to Formosa. And even then, the Chinese, the communists, had their eyes on Formosa. And we weren't going to let them have Formosa. And we could defend Formosa with our 7th Fleet because the Chinese didn't have a navy. They didn't have much of an air force. So that's interesting because if we could have, in some way, helped the nationalists hold on to power and stood up to the communists, by that I mean stood up to Russia because Russia was behind them. And of course at that time people were more concerned about the communists taking over Eastern Europe. And to this day, they say that Roosevelt, gave Eastern Europe to the communists and so forth. Really, what they were doing, they were working the back door, too, in Asia. And I feel that maybe had we had the will to stand up to them, they would have backed down. And if they had backed down and we had been able to maybe gotten a better government in there and held on to China, we wouldn't have had Korea. And we certainly wouldn't have had, I don't think we would have had Vietnam. But that's speculation. But that was it. We came back, I came back, I took the last ship out. I'll never forget that. We had something like 4,000 troops, along with these white Russian women, and a lot of little orphan kids. One kid we named Smokey Joe. And in Singtown, a lot of the cities over there, we had a lot of abandoned babies. There were little orphan kids running around, homeless and so forth, and they would get together in gangs to try to survive, and a lot of them just couldn't make it, and it wasn't unusual to find a lot of them on the street, starved to death or whatever. And we had a sergeant and a corporal that would take this dump truck out to the local dump every day to check things out in this area, in the outskirts of town. And this one afternoon they went out, and the corporal said, I thought I heard a whimper, like a little kid crying. The sergeant said, I just hear anything. He said, no. I said, it came in the direction of that incinerator over there. They used oil drums to burn stuff in. I think it's coming from that incinerator over there. So he went over, and here was this little kid, an 8 or 9 year old kid, dumped right in this incinerator, half alive. Lice all over him and sores all over his body. He pulled him out and brought him to the truck. The sergeant says, he's too far gone. Corporal said, no, let's take him back. Let's take him back to sick bay anyway. So they took him back. And the medics looked at him and said, we can do what we can. This kid is so undernourished that to give him any kind of food now, his system probably couldn't take it. We don't have much hope for him. He said, well, let's give it a try. So they did. And over a period of 3 months, they gradually brought this kid back to health. And he had a will to live. He was a cute little kid. And he learned the English language just like that. And he'd go around to all our squad bays and want to know if there's work he could do. And we'd give him jobs like shining shoes and all that sort of thing. He really became the darling of our regiment. And somebody said, why don't we make him the regimental mascot? Well, that's a good idea. What do we do with him? Well, he said, he can speak English and, of course, Chinese. We can use him as an interpreter when we make our rounds at night. Or we'll stick him right on the Jeep, and if we get challenged, he can speak to them in Chinese. So we decided to adopt him officially. So one of the guys in the outfit was good with a needle and thread and made him a little miniature uniform, Marine uniform with a sergeant stripe on his. And somebody else made him a little toy gun. And at our next regimental review, we had a real presentation out there, Smokey Joe. I got some pictures of him up there. And in the meantime, of course, we knew we were pulling out, and the guys were wondering whether they could get him into the United States legally. So they were writing letters back to different officials and so forth. And the reply that we got back was that we had quotas back at that time for immigration, had been met for a particular period, and they said the only way that you can get him back in legally is to have an American citizen agree to adopt him. So I started writing letters to anybody that had connections back home, and we were all set to smuggling into the country. They had a sea bag made just for him, to hide him in the sea bag and so forth. And about a week, I guess, before we pulled out, we got this letter from home saying that a Chinese doctor in California, a Chinese-American doctor, had read the story of Smokey Joe and agreed to adopt him. So he was just delighted. and so were we. And anyway, we came back. That's the longest boat ride that I've ever been on. We left Tsingtao, I think it was like in October. We didn't get back to the States until the end of November, almost into December. We started back, we stopped at Japan on the way back, and we were going to disembark at Treasure Island in the West Coast. And we had a case of encephalitis breakout on ship. So they quarantined us off the coast of California. They had to fly medicine out to inoculate everybody on the ship. So that took time. We were there for almost 2 weeks. And they wouldn't let us into California. We had to go through the canal all the way and disembark at Norfolk. So that was 1940, the end of 1947, the beginning of 1948, and of course Chiang Kai-shek fell from power in 49. But I feel that we did a lot of good over there, and at least getting a lot of people out of there and giving the Nationalists time to get better organized on Formosus, because as you know, during the 50s, I think it was, when the communists started challenging the Nationalist government remember, during Nixon's and the Matsu, Komoy Island incidents and so forth took place. The only reason why they didn't take that was because we control the sea with that 7th Fleet, plus the fact that we had the air power. And there was one air battle that took place over the Straits between the Nationalists and the Red Chinese Air Forces. And of course, we had trained the Nationalist pilots, and they had the latest equipment. And they pulverized the Chinese Air Force, the air squadron that was sent over. There wasn't too much said about that. I don't think we knew that much until much later. But that did it from that time on. I mean, they made threats, but it was not anything like that particular time. So, we kind of feel good about what we did.
So then in 47 you returned to the States.
So I returned, and I went back to, what do I do with this? I went back to school, and of course I was married, and I had belonged to the Zeta Psi fraternity. I don't know why I joined the fraternity. Okay. I had joined a fraternity back in 1942, 43. And of course, when I came back, I was an old veteran fart. And married. And there were an awful lot of other veterans that returned too. And they were all married. And the college built the vet village, as they call it, a March Field. These are veteran huts strictly for married vets. And so that's where I finished up my college, and that was 1940, the latter part of 48, and I graduated in 49 when I should have graduated back in 1946. And that's where Susie was born, up in Easton. And only became pregnant with Rick while we were up there. And I came, so from there, I switched over. Originally I had majored in geology, but when I came back I decided to go for teaching and coaching. So I shifted over to education, and then from there I sent out applications. I got a job up in Long Island, New York, West Hampton, teaching and coaching. That was 1949-50. 1950, the Korean War broke out. And I was still in the reserves, and I was looking around for a reserve unit close by up there that I could join. And while I was doing that, I got my orders for Korea. And so they sent me again to Quantico in 1951, and only came here. And then when I finished up in Quantico there, they sent me out to Pendleton again. And out in Pendleton, by then I was a first lieutenant, and they made me an executive officer of a company, a draft company. At that time, the Marines were drafting. A lot of people don't realize this. And I had a company of Marine. One platoon was, I remember, almost every one of them were from New York. And another platoon were entirely Puerto Rican. And the first thing we had to do was to take them up to winterized training at a place called Pico Meadows in the Sierra Nevada prior to going to Korea. This is to get us used to winter fighting and Chinese tactics and so forth. And boy, that was the most godforsaken place. At 20 feet of snow, they couldn't take us by bus. They had to fly us into Nevada and then ship us across the Nevada to this godforsaken place out in the boonies. And these Puerto Ricans had never seen snow. And I have never seen a more miserable bunch of guys. On top of that, a lot of them had bad teeth. They couldn't chew their food properly, and we were on sea rations. And they didn't give us snowshoes. We had thermo boots. Trudging through that damn snow, and of course the aggressors were all Korean veterans using Chinese tactics against us and so forth. And they particularly singled out our company because these Puerto Ricans were lagging behind and so forth. They were miserable. And I don't know how we got them through, but we did. I think the mistake was made in having them all in one unit. And when we got back to Pendleton, we said, before you send these people over, you got to break them up and spread them out into all other units. And that's probably the best thing we ever did. Because when we got over to Korea and got up in the front lines, we weren't fighting the North Koreans. We were fighting the Chinese. And the Chinese, of course, at that time, outnumbered us almost 7-1. Our lines were so thin that we didn't have any backup reserve units to counterattack any penetrations that they would make, and they were doing an awful lot of infiltrating, an awful lot of small unit fighting for holding hills and so forth. And, of course, then they started the peace conferences at Panmunjom. And Panmunjom was right in our defensive sector. So we have responsibility for enforcing all the regulations pertaining to the corridor that goes out to Panmunjom from both sides, the communist side and our side. And we had a negotiating team headed by General Harrison, who represented the United Nations. And it was quite a parade every day when they had these conferences out at Panmunjom, right in the middle of no man's land, right between the Chinese lines and our lines. This entourage of of jeeps and all kinds of things going out there. The communists coming down from their side had 1938 Buicks and all kinds of jazzed up. They were really trying to impress us, the North Koreans. But at those conferences, they were really, it was really the Chinese who were calling the shots. And there have been all kinds of rumors about an attempt to kidnap General Harrison. So we had to set up a reinforced company to be in a position near Panmunjom to move in quickly and rescue him, if in fact we felt that they were making a move to kidnap him. So about that time, about that time I was company commander. I'd been exec under Captain Wig, his name was. So I became company commander. Then eventually they rotated us back, and I was made division historian. And my duties as division historian, the biggest duty was to collect all the unit diaries that every unit was supposed to keep, which documented all the actions. And there were a lot of little actions going on, platoon size, company size, and so forth. Plus, we had to cover all the proceedings at Panmunjom. So I had a combat photography crew and a helicopter. And I can remember we would go out and take pictures around Panmunjom. At one time, we suspected that they were disguising communist soldiers to look like Chinese peasant farmers working in the rice paddies. So we called them on that. We took pictures of this and we showed them the pictures. They said, get those people out of there if you want to continue the negotiations. So they did. And that was an interesting, that part of it, because, it was back and forth. The Chinese are trying to get us to move back to the 38th parallel. Well, the 38th parallel was indefensible. It's just a geographical line across a map. What we wanted to hold the line after, what we wanted to do was to hold the line that we have now, which is now the demarcation line that runs diagonally across what was a 38th parallel. That was defensible, and it had to be that because we didn't have the manpower. The Chinese, as I said, outnumbered us. The only thing that they didn't have was control of the air, and of course, being on a peninsula, the 7th Fleet, we used the battleships like the New Jersey over here. They could deliver naval gunfire, pinpoint it, anywhere along halfway across the peninsula without any trouble at all. So every one of our units, I know our unit, we had naval gunfire spotters with us at all times. And at any time we suspected something like one of these human attacks in one of our positions, we just radio out to the outposts, tell the guys, hey, the Chinese are coming, pull in, we're going to saturate the hill. And so they pull in, the Chinese, they come in at night, blowing their bugles and so forth and so on. We get the naval gunfire spotters, or bureau back the coordinates, and boy, in 20 minutes, it's naval gun shells coming like sound like a locomotive coming through the. And the Chinese hear those coming, boy, they just scatter like ants because they could saturate an area 1,000 miles by like 500 or 1,000 yards by 500 yards area, just saturated with shrapnel. So after that, and of course, I got some pictures of they were using kids. 13-year-old kids in these human wave attacks. They were just farmer boys that they conscripted off the fields in China, and they were using them as grenadiers. They give them aprons with something like 15 to 20 pockets with these concussion grenades, and they form them in a line and move them towards the outpost. And then right behind them was another line of soldiers with automatic machine guns. And the idea was the first line would charge the position, throwing these grenades as fast as they could to stun our men in the holes, neutralize them. And then the next line would come right out on top and just pepper the positions with machine gun fire. But it wasn't working. Because, again, we had control of the air, and we had better technology, rangefinders. Some of this precision guns we even had back then, nothing like we had in Iraq, but we had things that were a heck of a lot better than what the Chinese had. And they, in time, despite the fact that they outnumbered us, respected us, and finally agreed in 1953 to a truce, just a truce. So the war in Korea has never officially ended. And that's what it is to this day. And we have, 53,000 troops over there now. And I guess it's important that we keep them over there.
Sounds like it. Okay, so did that end the war, or So that was what, 53 or?
53 is when they signed it. I was over there in 50, 51, 52. I came back.
What rank were you, by the way?
Well, by then, let's see, I was captain. I made captain when I was company commander, and when I became the historian. That was I got some of the diaries that are now declassified up there with pictures that we took, which tell the story pretty vividly. And I came back, and when I went to Haddonfield, one of the reasons why I didn't go back to New York was the Marine Corps asked me to take over and organize a reserve unit for South Jersey down here in Camden. And I had been looking at a job in Haddonfield, and that did it, because it was right here in Camden. So I did, and so I was there as CO for that. I helped to organize it and commanded that for a period of 6 years. During that period, I became major, and then at the end of that, I went over and joined a staff officers outfit over in the Navy Yard, and we used to go out and set up problems for reserve units on their maneuvers for 2 weeks training in the summertime, that sort of thing. And so that's what I did until I retired, 1971.
Very interesting. And
So,
now, did you teach? You said you did teach.
yeah, I taught, and that was another thing, that because I did a lot of instructing in the service, and I liked it, and I like teaching, and of course I like coaching. I coached track up. As a matter of fact, when I got my orders up there in Long Island, they were lining me up to take over the head football coaching job because a football coach was retiring up there. So the next year, if I going back, I did coach the track team up there. That's what I would have done. But I did coach here in Haddonfield for about 4 or 5 years. But then I got involved in camp work. Jim Lawrence, who was a Marine pilot, about a year older than I am, came back from the war, and his father had bought a camp up in Maine back in the 1920s. And his father died suddenly in 1949 and dumped the whole thing in Jim's lap. Jim had gone through the camp as a camper. And he was down here at Penn interviewing applicants because he was organizing an entirely new staff. And he interviewed Oney's uncle, this Bob Lockery. And Bob Lockery told him about me. And I had this phone call one night. He was up in New York. He said, "I'd like to meet you. How about flying up and meeting me?" So I did. And we hit it off pretty well. I'd never been in New England, let alone Maine. And that was the other thing. And that came just about the time I took the job over in Haddonfield. So that did it. I never did get back to Long Island. And I continued, as I say, in the Corps until 1971. Retired as a lieutenant colonel.
Wonderful.
26 years.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah.
I hope I didn't